NGOs, etc., etc.
So maybe I can start here and just present a bit the overall international standards that exist in relation to education in emergency. And we can name several standards that are really important in regards to addressing issues that are related to education in emergency. The first one that I would mention would be the minimum standards for child protection in humanitarian action. That is a key handbook that describe different standards that are available for child protection practitioners, but there is also a component that's focused on education. And there is one specific standard that is in link to education, which says that all children have access to quality education that is protective and inclusive and that promotes dignity and participation throughout all essential activities. So that's one of the standards in the child protection minimum standard that is related to education, and I would name this one as the first one. But then there is also other standards that are quite important in education in emergency, and the second one would be the INI minimum standard for education. That is also a handbook for education practitioners that help them organize their work in relation to education in emergency, where there is like foundational standards, access and learning environment component, teaching and learning, teachers and other educational personnel, how to organize them. And then there is like the link with education policy and coordination. So that's the second one. And a third one would be making sure that we have safeguarding policy and at organizational level for education components, so making sure that we are keeping children safe in the environment of education. And the last one that is actually a very important one as well is like all our interventions normally are based on the Convention of the Rights of the Child, and the convention has specific standards on education, the article 28 and 29 that are access to education and the aims of education that are also very important in regards to the international standards that are linked to education. And one thing that I wanted to add on that is the fact that most of the time when we start setting up educational activities in a context of an emergency, we are doing things on the rush, but we are somehow applying all these standards because we are professional in our way of working, and we realize it after all that we were actually following those standards. So it's also a good reminder to like acknowledge that majority of the action and the activities that are put in place are following those standards, even if we are not by the book all the time looking at the standards that we need to apply. So I just wanted to like also mention that.
Többiek?
What about the others?
Kristina.
Christina?
Yes, yes. I mean, since I'm a German national working in Hungary, I can maybe give an idea of the German perspective, if that's welcome, or if you would rather focus on Hungary. Mm-hmm. Maybe Herta can explain the Hungarian situation. But I think what is unique about the current situation is that on the one hand, Germany has some experience with accepting refugees and integrating them in the German or in the national educational system, even though in Germany it's a little bit complicated because we have several federal states and each federal state can make its own decisions how this integration process should actually work. Nevertheless, especially since 2015, we have some experience how to integrate children, if we should integrate them in the classes immediately or focus on language acquisition first. There are different approaches. But I think what is really unique about this situation, in contrast to 2015, is that there is, of course, a very strong hope among refugee families that they can return to Ukraine. And this, I think, makes the situation different, because I have the feeling what we actually need to do is provide children with at least two scenarios, you know, on the one hand, to develop a path for them to integrate in the national educational system of the host country. But on the other hand, also to ensure that they can still connect with the Ukrainian educational system, which means especially like completing the school year, for example. We see that with the majority of our children and their families, that they have this kind of double package on them, you know, following the Ukrainian curriculum on the one hand, and on the other hand, trying to become part of the host country. And I think this is really unique, and this kind of requires a different response at the moment. We have to see how this is going to develop, but of course, at the moment, the hopes are really still very high that the families will sooner or later return. And this is a completely different situation to the children and youngsters who arrived in Germany, for example, in 2015.
Orsi, egy kicsit hadd szólítsalak meg téged.
Orsi, what about you, remaining at the same topic? So you who have an overview on Ukrainian and Hungarian public education as well. So as for Hungarian public education, so can these children be integrated? So can Hungarian kindergarten or school system do anything with these children? Because we don't know how many children, and we don't know for how long should be educated either on their own language or some other language. Thank you very much for the question. Yes, indeed, it is a very complex task to be solved. I can only share my own experiences with you. In my opinion, so as a person who worked both in Hungary and in Ukraine as a teacher, I experienced that the educational system in Hungary needs to be reformed because this is pretty rigid. So we have the national curriculum, etc., etc. But first, I think teachers should be prepared much better for this entire story. However, this was indeed an emergency situation. So the war broke out from one day to another. And as you mentioned, nobody would have thought that this war was going to go on for more than a year. And of course, there is an additional challenge, as you mentioned. These children who need to be integrated into the Hungarian education system do not speak Hungarian. I think there is an opportunity, and even more. So I think these kids could be integrated into Hungarian education system, and they need to be integrated because, of course, it's a legal requirement for them to participate in education. Because if somebody spends more than 3 months in Hungary and is of school age, need to attend school. So it applies to refugee children as well. And in my opinion, so this situation can be solved, but teachers need to be prepared much better, schools need to be prepared much better, and external experts, and I mean, the help of international or the help of external experts should be applied. However, there's one more thing which is really important. Hungarian and Ukrainian educational systems are not exactly the same. And pretty obviously, these children need to get used to the Hungarian educational system. And because we speak about traumatized children who come from a country in war, and to make things even more difficult, now they're sitting in classrooms where they do not speak the local language. However, let me emphasize that it can be solved. It cannot be done from one day to another. However, there are children, there are families who would like to settle here in Hungary. So not each and every family would like to return to Ukraine. So we have two types of families. So type 1 means families who would like to return to Ukraine. However, there are families, type number 2, who would like to settle here, and they are much more open, and they try to get used to Hungarian education system much better, because they know that Hungary is going to be their future. So they spend much more time and much more energy in, for example, learning Hungarian. But those who'd like to return to Ukraine only would like to survive. And of course, they do not spend too much energy on learning languages. Herta, what about you? Can you follow continuously how many children are there in Hungary and how many children need services? Well, my first reaction would be that this is not a brand new problem. So the fact that third country children are in the educational system is not a new challenge, but as mentioned by Orsolya, the schools are not prepared for that, and there are no opportunities for us to help these kids. Before, so sooner, I've worked in various projects, for example, for Agora Foundation, because in the areas close to the border, the situation appears because there are foreign children in the educational system who do not speak Hungarian, and in Budapest, Szeged, Debrecen, so in bigger Hungarian towns, the same situation applies. We do have literature, but in a limited number only. However, you know, I always worked with NGOs whose funds were covered by the European Union. Schools only had to provide access of education for children, and university students help them usually. In Miskolc, for example, a book was published on simplified language use. So how to teach, for example, biology with simplified language use. So there are various initiatives. However, these are just local initiatives, so we do not have a systemized initiative. I cannot tell you exact figures. Sociometria Ltd has such figures, but I think approximately there are 10,000 such kids. At least this is the latest figure I'm aware of. And, you know, we do have German and English examples. I mean, for example, their solution should be that at the age of 16, they start their previous class once more when they start a new school. And of course, this is not a very good solution for the 16-year-old young people. And the problem is that, unfortunately, there are no educational staff who would help them in learning Hungarian. However, in Budapest, there are several schools where third country students appear. However, I think we need to differentiate between two situations, so whether these kids come from other EU countries or not. So, for example, in Budapest, in the 10th district, we have lots of Chinese and Vietnamese children with whom teachers have to deal with. And what kind of social status do they come from? So what I'm thinking of is, so for example, those kids who are from a better off family, do they have better chances? Or because maybe if they have the financial backgrounds, they can attend other schools. I mean, they can attend schools where they can learn in Russian, or I don't know. So can we see differences based on social background? If the question is to me, then I would like to answer, yes, indeed, there are huge differences, visible differences based on their social background. If the parents don't speak Hungarian, that's an additional challenge. So in an average Hungarian school, for example, these parents cannot communicate with the teachers because pretty often teachers do not speak English, and very often it is the kids or the kids who interpret between the teachers and the parents, which is not a good situation at all. So my answer is that this is indeed a huge challenge. And the problem is that, they don't really know the system. They would like to give everything for their kids. They can afford. However, very often they would need network for that, relationship, money. So, and it is indeed visible how much of these they have, because this is how they can pick the score. Orsi, yes, I'd like to add a couple of ideas. I completely agree with Herta. And, I can only speak about those individuals with whom we get in contact with. So we have reached 310 kids since the breakout of the war. And during the summer and later, it became obvious for us that this war was going on longer. And indeed, these kids need to be integrated into the Hungarian education system. In August, there was an initiative to open a Ukrainian school, and many schools were hoping for this school to open in September. And of course, there would be no linguistic issues and they will be able to take their kids there. However, at the last weeks of August, it turned out that there would be no such school opening in Hungary. So each and every kid needs to attend Hungarian-speaking schools. Well, we organized summer camps in July and August for 6 weeks. And there we paid attention to their Hungarian language education so that they can get used to, at some level, Hungarian language. There was also a psychologist helping them. And what's more, we tried to provide them information on the Hungarian educational system so that they could understand what is similar and what is different. Because in Ukraine, basically, primary school lasts not 8 years, but 9 years. So there is an additional year compared to the Hungarian system. And following that, they spend 2 to 3 years in secondary school or grammar school. And in Ukraine, the evaluation system is also completely different. In Hungary, we have a scale 1 to 5, but in Ukraine, there's a scale of 1 to 12. So we had to just inform them about these differences. Until year 2000, they also used to have a scale of 5. However, then they introduced the scale of 12. So it means that 10, 11, 12 equals with the Hungarian 5, where 5 is the best. So they had to be able to just jump in between the two systems. For us, the Hungarian evaluation system is natural, but for them, it was not. And for example, repeating a year theoretically exists in Ukraine. So for example, in grade 1 and 2, if the parents, after having consulted with the teachers, feel that the children haven't performed well, can repeat year. However, and if they need to repeat a year later, then a year can be repeated only once, but this is very rare. However, in Hungary, this situation is completely different. So I mean, these phenomena can be very strange for Ukrainian kids, or for example, holidays. we do organize holiday related events, for example, like Christmas party or other events, or carnival, for example. But this is something which is non-existing in Ukraine. So we wanted to inform them about that. And as for the socio-economic background, families that we meet usually are middle-class families. So in Hungary, they have rented flats, they try to work, or if only mothers are here with the children, that's a different story. But in some families, the fathers are also here. But of course, there are also people who are much better off, who are ready to pay for a private school, but on average, these families do need additional subsidization, for example, for being able to learn Hungarian or learning English, etc., etc. Thank you. Gassian, can I ask you, in the neighboring countries, I mean, for Hungary, neighboring countries, also either in Romania, in Moldova, what kind of best practices are there? Or so are there any best practices that are working there but not working yet in Hungary?
Well, I think the issues that Hungary is facing are actually the same in Romania and Moldova. We are facing similar issues, and the first main issue that was presented by Erta, Christian, and Orsi are the same. In Romania, for example, the first thing is like the language of the classes. So the same Ukrainian children doesn't speak Romanian, and it was proposed to them to be included in the school, but as auditor of the school, meaning that they would be not actively participating in the school in a language where they don't speak and don't understand. So that was one of the solutions that was proposed in Romania by the government and the Ministry of Education, but it has a lot of obstacle and barriers for those children to actually be integrated, because they were present in the classroom, but they were not able to follow the class properly. So that was actually not like functioning fully. So now there is like a lot of investment in regards to language classes to make sure that those children can actually learn Romanian as fast as possible to be able to integrate the class and actually be able to follow the lessons. But the problem that we are also facing in the different countries is the fact that, as it was mentioned before, most of the parents, when they arrive in the neighboring countries, they had the idea that they will not stay for a long time because the war was not going to last for a long time. For everyone, it was this idea. So originally the parents were like, okay, so let's continue the online classes and let's have our children continue the online classes. And then when the war started to last a little bit, even though people realized that it was a long time for them, that they were in this neighboring country, hosting country, they still had this idea that at one point they will go back. And it was really creating another barrier for them to enroll their children in the school, because they still have this hope to go back, and they are like in this in-between situation where they don't really want to fully integrate in the host country, because they still have this hope of going back home, which really has a massive impact on the enrollment of the children. So there is this kind of hybrid setup where you have children still following the online education in Ukraine, and they somehow go to certain class in Romania, for example. So they have still this socialization with other children. They start understanding a bit the culture, the language, and so on, but they're still connected. And this also, I wanted to mention that because it was somehow mentioned also by the other participants, the fact that we know that those children went through trauma, distress, displacement that has an impact on the well-being, but also the learning capacity. And this situation of being in between for those children, it's also like has a major impact on their ability to properly follow education, because they don't know what's going to happen, and they are not fully integrated in the school in Romania, and they are not fully integrated in their online schooling in Ukraine, because they are not home, they are not with their classmates. So that's also has an incident, definitely. And one thing I wanted to mention as well is the fact that Orsi was mentioning the differences between the different education system in Ukraine, in Romania, in Hungary, in Moldova. It's different. There is also a major needs of advocacy for recognition of the schooling system. If you are refugee children that follow up the education in Hungary, and at one point you want to go back to Ukraine, you should have the possibility that your study that you did in Romania, and it can be primary school or secondary school as well, is actually recognized when you are back home. Because that was also one of the barriers from the parents to enroll the children in the host country schooling system. It's because they were worried that they will lose this period of time, because if they go back home, it will not be recognized. So I would not say that there is a lot of example from other countries that could be used. There is initiative, and I put it in the chat as well. There were like a program that was funded by the European Union that was that is called ECAM, and that was actually created before the Ukrainian war started, and they quickly adjusted this curriculum for the response to the refugee, the Ukrainian refugee crisis, and it's actually good practice for how to include and integrate children in hosting schools. So it's like looking at how you train the teacher, what type of capacity you need, and what it needs to be considered to make sure that those children are actually integrated in the schooling system. But it's just an example. In practice, unfortunately, we don't have a lot of good practices and example that function fully. But I would say that language classes makes a huge difference, definitely.
Kristina.
Yes, going back to what Katrin said, that's why we are trying to respond to this sort of hybrid situation with our schooling projects, for example, because on the one hand, we strongly try to support Ukrainian children to integrate into the Hungarian educational system by providing Hungarian classes, Hungarian as a foreign language, and English, because English is the language of communication here in Hungary, because clearly, obviously, they do not speak Hungarian if they are not from the Hungarian minority in Ukraine. But at the same time, we try to provide the core subjects, the Ukrainian core subjects in Ukrainian, because like you've just said, it is still not clear. And also for psychological reasons, we cannot really take this hope away from these families, and we cannot face them with the fear that this war might continue for years. It's, I think, ethically impossible. So within our schooling project, we try to give these two responses, to give them a hand to get into the Hungarian system, and to give them a hand and say, okay, we want to make sure that you can continue and finish your Ukrainian school year, let's say. And also what you said, I think it's very important, the differences between between the Ukrainian and Hungarian schooling system. I think it's important. It would be great to create workshops for teachers, motivated teachers, to make them aware of the differences, and then maybe also to see where do problems arise from, because we have different school cultures, so to speak. And now we have the time maybe to develop awareness for this. Also, I would like to give a positive or maybe best practice example. We are cooperating very closely with a high school in Budapest, where we have also enrolled a handful of Ukrainian students, and they attend school there. And you can really observe that now within 6 months, they have learned so much Hungarian that they can communicate with their Hungarian peers. So they can use daily Hungarian. And they have even already taken a language test in Hungarian. So I think it's possible. I think, unfortunately, it has a lot to do with the personal motivation of teachers, naturally. But maybe it's not only the personal motivation. I have 1 or 2 more things. I can also confirm that there were big hopes for Ukrainian school in Budapest or in Hungary. But yeah, these hopes were sort of devastated. So there, at the moment, we don't see such a project coming up. And this is, for example, a difference to Germany. So in Germany, we have several intercultural projects coming up. So schools where you can learn in German and Ukrainian. So there are different options here. And I think this has also to do with the overall social, cultural, political context, because in countries like Poland or Hungary, there is, of course, a different political discourse, which makes it easier for a school. Okay, we are going to accept Ukrainian children. We are going to help. We will put it on our homepage. We will initiate some activities. The social context is a very different one. And here in Hungary, you have to act way more cautiously if you want to show open solidarity. That's to play things safe. Let's say this is my subjective experience. Also, I would like to raise attention to a certain group of children where I'm a little bit afraid what will happen to them. And I'm talking about young adults who will soon finish school. May it be in Ukraine or like via online teaching or in Hungary, because I had to, or you all will know better, but if I'm not mistaken, you can finish school in Hungary at the age of 16, I believe. Is it possible? So what happens with those adults, and I'm especially also thinking young adults of the young males, because if they return to Ukraine, they have to join the war. So what we observe, we had a workshop on this in December, an international workshop with Hungarian partners, German and Polish partners, and we all observe that there is a segment of young adults, Ukrainian young adults, who sort of disappear from the radar. They have to be there, but they don't attend school. And I'm very worried about this segment of 16, 17, 18 years old, what they actually do. I'm very worried that there will be a gap in their education, that they somehow get lost. Yes, that was a lot. I'm sorry.
Nagyon fontos dolgokat, meg tapasztalatokat mondtál el.
Well, you shared very important experiences and aspects with us, Christina. And my question here is, without, I mean, so the Hungarian government doesn't really take part in education, even though public education, as its name says, is a duty of the Hungarian government. However, for more than 1 year, our experiences are that mostly NGOs fulfill these roles. So my question is, have you experienced, and in what proportion do you experience public help, public subsidization, for example, in making the previously mentioned Ukrainian school reality, so that NGOs and civilians get enough help to educate and train teachers, etc., etc., etc.?
Nem tudom, melyik kötök érzi
magát. I do not know which of you would like to reply to this question, Orsi.
Jó, rendben. Igen,
Okay, yes, indeed. Of course, it's not easy to cooperate with public organizations, public institutions, because this is a pretty closed system. And my experiences are that, for example, when we only would like to get figures, data from the educational office, for example, regarding on how many refugee children have enrolled to Hungarian educational systems, and how many of they are Ukrainians. And it's very difficult, and they tend to close up. So I think this tells you something. So when we are unable to get figures, we are unable to get statistics. So, for example, you asked how many refugee children are there in the system, in the educational system, and we don't have specific figures, because on the one hand, we don't get specific figures. We know, of course, how many children there are in our systems. And I'm telling you that if this situation was not tackled, I mean, so I'm really glad that many public educational institutions are ready to help. And of course, it would be better to have a top-down approach and say, okay, let's have a look at what kind of needs there are on the side of the refugee children, and let's listen to the best practices and recommendations of experts, and then hand in hand with the public education institutions, with the teachers, let's do something with the situation, because unfortunately we have to be prepared for a long-term crisis, and maybe this is not the only wave of refugees arriving to Hungary, because if we are not speaking only about Ukrainian refugees, but refugees in general, of course, our education institutions should be prepared to act in such situations. However, for that, we would need a top-down approach, because we, civil organizations or NGOs, we are open to act. However, unfortunately, we do not get the request from the top. And unfortunately, it seems that there's no top-down approach, even though I think in close cooperation, in hand, we would be able to solve the situation. However, for that, we would need flexibility. But unfortunately, in Hungarian education system, this flexibility is non-existent. Everything is rigid. The curriculum, and this is exactly how I felt as a teacher. Okay, just make a tick. Okay, we have told this and that. We did what the system requires from us, but that's all. And I think this rigidity is something we should get rid of, and then it will be much easier for us to work with refugee children. So I think what we would need is openness and flexibility. But unfortunately, this is what we cannot feel at all. But we are hopeful, because perhaps someone in the future, it will be realized that such problems can only be solved together. Christina?
Yeah, so our schooling project has not received any public support. We have not applied for it, but we were also not aware that there would be any grants that we could apply for here in Hungary. We got support either from individuals, institutions, very often institutions that were linked with German culture, German diplomatic connections. I assume, again, because the political context is a different one, and it's just easier from a German perspective to visibly show solidarity, I think. But I agree, of course, it would make things easier if it would be a top-down process, or at least if there would be some public discourse that shows, okay, let's talk about it, there is an interest, there are some strategies. I think that could make things a lot easier. When it comes to best practice, what the main two paths we see in Germany, for example, are either a strong focus on language, so it's called welcome classes. So for one complete school year, children are sent into a class of refugees only, and there's a strong focus on language. There are advantages and disadvantages to this process, and the other way is just to get the children into the class and get started. And usually after some month and extra lessons in the afternoon, the whole thing gets rolling. So it's definitely possible, yeah, and especially the younger the children, the easier. But what we have to consider is the schooling system in Hungary and in Germany. We have a strong lack of teachers in both countries, actually. And in both countries, of course, you could see the reflex that the teachers were saying, oh my God, we are already so overworked. And at least in Hungary, we are so underpaid. How shall we deal with this situation now? So this is another aspect. I mean, many Hungarian teachers have been protesting for better conditions. And I think this makes things also more difficult, and asks for more highly motivated individuals who say, okay, I'm going to use my spare time to teach children Hungarian as a foreign language.
Orsi?
Igen, bocsánat, még egy-két gondolatot, így egyetértek Krisztina.
Just a handful of ideas. I completely agree with Christina. Yes, indeed, teachers are overloaded, and when in September it became clear that these refugee children will need to participate in the Hungarian educational system, and the public approach was that, okay, teachers involved will get gross 30,000 Hungarian forints, so approximately 100 euros if they are ready to provide Hungarian lessons for kids. However, over and above the fact that these kids do not speak Hungarian, they are traumatized children because they come from a country in war, and now they stay in Hungary, worrying for what is happening at home, at their school. They're left families, friends, relatives behind, and you know, these kids need a different approach. And what's more, and what's really sad in the current situation, is that in public educational institutions, psychologists are not easy to be involved. And I'm sure that these kids should be taken care of by psychologists. And over and above the fact that they need some Hungarian lessons, they need to be integrated, they need to feel safe and secure, and for that they would need psychological support. However, but unfortunately, this cannot be provided by the public education system, because even if they have psychologists, it's 90% sure that they do not speak either Ukrainian or Russian. So this is another aspect. So I think teachers should be prepared for that. However, you know, this story has so many big points because teachers are overburdened. There are so many kids per classes. It's very difficult to differentiate. So we could speak for hours about how difficult this situation is for teachers, but I like to highlight once more that these are traumatized kids, so they would need special attention, they would need special care. Thank you. We haven't mentioned one thing, namely the peers, Hungarian peers, and Hungarian parents who are around the system or who are also involved in the system. What is your experience? How much help do they provide? How welcoming they are? And do they, Christina mentioned that the system is more complex in Hungary compared to Poland, because maybe kids also need to face the situation that there are some who are Russian friendly. So which is stronger, this or the solidarity that we could experience at the train stations at the very beginning of the war? So what about peers and parents?
I will speak more generally here, and maybe after the Hungarian colleagues can jump in. But I would not make a general statement, because it's like for the school, it depends on the people working in those places. So it's the same for peer support. It depends on every individual. Some people will be very reluctant to support and to provide some help, and some will be very happy to provide this support. So I would really say that it depends on the person that you come across. And this is also where, just to also complement what Orsi was saying, the need of advocacy and more public expression of the needs of inclusion of those children in the school, that could also make a shift in the statement of the government, let's say, or in regards to inclusion of children in the educational system, is quite important, because we cannot, like NGOs cannot by themselves provide what the government should be providing. So that's the need, and the request should come from the government. And just to go back to peers, I guess the colleagues on the ground have different experience, but honestly it depends on the people. There is people that are still very welcoming. So yeah.
Orsi.
Köszönöm szépen. Igen, ugye először is azt kell leszögeznünk, hogy
Thank you very much. What we have to make as a statement is that for the healthy development of kids, peers are really important, and they need to spend some time every single day in a school environment, for example, and among peers. So the question of openness and peers is based on age groups. So for example, a kid of 1st to 3rd grade is usually much more open. I mean, a Hungarian kid of the age of 6 to 8 is much more open to foreign children. So it is easier to make friends as opposed to the linguistic difficulties at this age. So they can make friends with each other. However, as a teenager, the situation is much more difficult, because kids tend to be much closer. They are pickier. They also pay attention to prejudice, to third party opinion. However, I mean, the kids belonging to us have very positive experience about their peers. And there are many kids who do speak English to some extent, or attend bilingual schools, and it helps them in making friends and in communicating with peers. And I also have good example, because there are some kids who come from Transcarpathia, so they speak Ukrainian and Hungarian at the same time, and they can help with interpreting between their peers and teachers. And as for parents, sometimes they are very open. So it's not black and white. It really depends on institution. It depends on the head teacher, for example, because the head teacher can really prepare the kids for foreign kids arriving, for refugee children arriving. But generally speaking, these children are pretty well, are on good terms with their peers. They get enough information. They get help if they ask for help. So in this topic, I can only share positive experience with you. Herta and then Christina, and this is the last round, because I could see the daughter behind the back of Christina, and my daughter is going to arrive pretty soon, and she won't let us going on with the discussion further on. So Herta and Christina, just in a nutshell. So I think we cannot generalize this question. However, what I can see is it's always NGOs with the help of which this story can work properly, because as long as there is no help provided from top down, no real advance can be achieved. However, there's a very good school in Budapest, in Szent Andrei school. The Baptist helped this school, and they work really well with teens. I mean, teenagers. There are some language days so that children can get to know the language of the others, and there are days when they cook. So they try to organize additional programs. And what we did as an NGO, we organized programs for teachers. And perhaps if they can earn points, they will be much more willing to participate. And there are some who are interested anyway. And we also mentioned this topic in teacher training. So, for example, it's a personal command. I do so at my classes, but we would need much more support. And Christina.
Yeah, I very much agree. I think by now we have gained so much experience. It's high time we offered more of these conversations, workshops for teachers to encourage them that you can do it. It's possible. And let me maybe close with one really nice observation. At the very beginning of the war, when we were setting up this schooling project, I very often heard two sentences. One was, "But they're not going to stay, are they?" That was one response. And the other response was, "But it's not possible to integrate them. How should it work? They don't speak Hungarian." So during the early weeks, I heard this very, very often. And what I observe now, especially with the school we are cooperating with, they have stopped looking at these children as a burden, but they have started looking at these children as individuals. So they have got rid of this idea, this is only a problem. No, this has become a kid, a person, a human being who is funny or who is talented with mathematics or whatever. And this is beautiful. And we should, I think, encourage people to see this, to see that their status of being a refugee is only, it's an important, but it's only one bit of their personality. And there's a lot, much other we can, look at.
Ez nagyon szép végszó volt a Krisztinától.
This was a fantastic closing word from Christina. I think such dialogues really contribute to take further steps, and hopefully the wider public will also be able to see what could work better and how. Thank you very much. Herta, do you want to share? No, it's okay. So thank you so much for participating in this discussion. I have some technical information I'd like to share with you. On the one hand, that via chat, questions can be sent for us, and we're going to answer these questions later. And as we leave Zoom, Zoom will ask for feedback, and I kindly ask you to fill in the feedback form. The next date is the 12th of May. Thank you very much for your participation, and have a nice day. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Hello.
Bye-bye.
Sziasztok.
Thank you. Bye-bye.